The government works on the basis, we work on long-term plans, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. What your housing board flats are going to look like, how are you going to structure medical services, hospitals, infrastructure, these are all 20, 30 years. So when we talk about coastal protection, we are even talking about even longer.
2070, right? Hi, welcome to Majula Presents Local Politics. Hi Dan.
Vanan, how are you?
Good.
Yeah.
How are you?
I've been quite busy, but I think not as busy as our special guest today.
Yeah. You have been trending. And thanks for taking the time off for you to come. But like you said, our guest today needs no introduction.
Sure.
Also taking time off your very busy schedule. Thank you very much for coming to the podcast, Minister Shanmugam.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Staying true to the podcast, we Majula Presents the Local Politics. We try to cut above the politics and try to understand the policies that are affecting Singaporeans, not just in how they are viewing it, how it's being analyzed, but how it's also being disseminated to them.
Yeah. And maybe just for clarity, I'm going to take off my PAP hat for an hour and then put on my political pundit hat, as we do this.
Sure.
But that's up to everyone to decide.
So just to begin, thank you very much for coming, Min. I wanted to actually dive straight into it. Lots of things have been happening all across and all around the world. Most recently with tariffs, but also maybe not so recently with what's happened in Israel and Palestine. Singapore being a small country, it has felt some of these effects, not only politically and policy-wise, but for the everyday resident. How do you see some of those impacts that is happening in Singapore?
We are a small place, stating the obvious, 720 square kilometers, small population. We make our living by trading with the world, so very dependent on the external economy. The external economy is 3 times the size of our internal economy. So any shock outside has a very significant impact inside Singapore. And you take the latest, the tariff situation and the administration's restatement of American positions. It has a very significant, serious consequences for us. And I would outline 2 parts to it. One is the security situation. If you look at the post-World War II, post-Second World War, what happened was really, you can say Pax Americana, but essentially they maintained peace around the world by being the global policeman. The US had its navies, the 7th Fleet in the Pacific Ocean, and the various other fleets, Atlantic Ocean, Indian Ocean, and they had bases all around. They had alliances all around, NATO in Europe, Japan, South Korea, other allies in Asia, and Middle East, and so on. You had a situation where there was relative peace. It didn't mean that countries didn't go to war. It didn't mean that the Americans always managed to make peace, but by and large. And they helped keep the oceans open, safe for our trading. If you want ships from Singapore to go through the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, South China Sea, freedom of navigation across the seas, to some extent the Americans helped to keep these things steady and open. It was very vital, very important. The security relationships are now being questioned. NATO has been questioned. The vice president at a Munich security conference said that effectively the America might be paying less attention in Europe and coming over more to Asia. But America's allies, one lesson that they are drawing is that America may say, I don't want to play the role that I've played all along. From now on, you are responsible for your own security. So in that situation, if you don't have a global order, then it might become a free-for-all and big versus small. And everyone has got to defend himself. And the UN Security Council, the effectiveness might not be the same as it used to be in the past. In the past, you already had a situation where any other P5 can veto. Now it's going to be more difficult, even more difficult. Right? So it becomes a world where small countries like us become more vulnerable than we have been so far.
Yeah.
So that's on the security side. On the economic side, you also have very serious issues because the way the economic architecture was, US built up various institutions, World Bank and US and Europe together, IMF, the trading system, GATT, and then became WTO. A relatively free trading system without too many barriers was built up, excluding what was then the Soviet Union, and which wasn't very relevant in the economic context. And we were trading with everybody else. And we and many other countries, including China, many countries in Asia, prospered under this arrangement. What this administration has said is that they're going to put up walls.
Yeah.
How high the walls are, what the level of tariffs are going to be, nobody knows yet. Very high tariffs were put and then they were paused, but there is an across the board 10%, which itself is quite significant. And that creates barriers for trading. It increases the cost of goods. It could increase inflation. In fact, a lot of serious people think that it will increase inflation. And serious economists are predicting a possibility of recession in the US. US is 34% of the world's consumption, so anything that happens there has a big impact everywhere else. And our trading system, today's world is an interconnected world.
Right.
We don't necessarily, we do export to the US, but we don't necessarily export everything to the US.
Yeah.
Very often stuff here gets sent to other countries, say Vietnam, China, and so on. And then it's finished there and then exported. So those goods will be subjected to the tariffs they face or the restrictions they face. And China still faces 145% tariff rate. The second impact all of this, so our exports might go down. And investments may be affected because we have money now. You are not going to invest immediately. You're going to take a wait and see attitude for 3 months until the administration decides what to do with the tariffs. That's one whole quarter gone. So this year's profitability, this year's economic performance is going to be affected for companies, and therefore Singapore as well. And if you have money, you are not going to invest at this point. You're going to wait and see what the administration does. And the world economy has been dealt a blow in confidence because people are not sure what's going to happen now.
That's it.
The predictability is no longer there. It's become much more unpredictable. It's become much more volatile. So investments and expansions, increasing headcount, hiring more people, all these aren't things that you're going to do in a hurry. And that would have a significant impact. So the markets are volatile. Some have made money. A lot of people have lost money. It's a very murky situation, and it will affect the economies around the world.
I wanted to maybe bring this back to Singapore here, right? When PM gave a ministerial statement last week about the tariffs, even the opposition or the key opposition were quick to come out and say, yes, I think the approach that the Singapore government is taking is correct. However, quite quickly after that, some other parties or some other political opponents started to have a narrative that this is fear-mongering. And you even have some parties saying, oh, actually, this could be good for Singapore, et cetera, et cetera. I think that narrative is still kind of out there. What would you say to people who are still listening to these opposing views?
As regards the suggestion that this is fear-mongering, I think rather than we giving it descriptors, we just have to look at what world leaders are saying. The British Prime Minister K Shanmugam said that this is, and I quote, the end of the world as we know it. You just think about it, the end of the world as we know it. The Japanese Prime Minister, the third largest economy in the world, said this is a national crisis. The German Chancellor-elect, Mr. Merz, said this is a very urgent situation. IMF chief says that this is a significant risk to the world economy. Serious economists say that there is a 6 in 10 chance that the US could enter into a recession. And you look at the markets, after the Liberation Day announcement, the markets lost $6.6 trillion. And they've recovered some now. But I'm not sure we should say that taking this seriously is fear-mongering.
Yeah.
I think you should leave politics out of this.
Yeah.
Just look at it with a very clear, cold reality. It is a very uncertain, mixed picture with very significant consequences. In fact, as Sam Lee said, one of the key problems is the way the US is now approaching it. Previously, the flat trading system, where everybody traded with each other, is now going to be replaced by the United States of America will deal with each one of you separately and individually. So we will no longer be able to rely on a global supply chain and we fit into that supply chain automatically. We'll have to see what deal we get with the Americans, and vis-a-vis the Americans, everyone is in a weaker position, one-on-one. And how do we then try and make some kind of supply chain work? It's going to be complex. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. So that environment has changed. And that is the environment that we managed to, work in for our prosperity. And we did extremely well. So now we have to figure out. But as PM says, what do you do? I mean, you don't sit back and fear. PM says never fear. Things will change. Things will turn worse outside. You are a price taker. You deal with it. And we put our minds to it. We work on it. We can deal with it.
We're sitting here the day after the writ of the election has been announced. And obviously we're going to start a new term in a very volatile world. I mean, has the government kind of gamed out, actually, if Singaporeans don't get behind the government's approach, what could be a worst case scenario versus if they did, what could the government do to make things better?
The government works on the basis, we work on long-term plans. Both mid-term and long-term, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. We look at our aging population. You need to have a long-term plan, what your housing board flats are going to look like, how are you going to structure medical services, hospitals, infrastructure. These are all 20, 30 years. And when we talk about coastal protection, we are even talking about even longer.
2070, right?
So I don't think we say, what do we do? You continue to review. You look at Singapore's trajectory. You look at the international situation. You look at what creates jobs, investment flows, better the skills of our people, education. How do we find our way in the world and compete? The question remains the same. The answers change as the situation changes.
Minister, I wanted to kind of pull back a little bit on what you were talking about, the impact for a small country. I listened to the Minister's speech when he gave the analogy. He used the strong man, the arm wrestling contest. So for a small country like Singapore, the impacts, as you said, will be much more. How do we get people to understand, first of all, that yes, we are bracing for impact, but also Singaporeans might feel that we've always had different struggles and crises along the way. Asian financial crisis, GFC, COVID. There's the conversation about resiliency springs to my mind. Because it's an unprecedented situation, it could be a disaster. How do we get people on the ground, an average member, if you will, of public, to really understand that we need to imbue some of these factors, and it shouldn't just be that someone will look after this for me. I also need to understand what's happening.
I think you're not giving enough credit to our population. I think they understand. When the stock markets behave in the way they have, I said, $6 trillion and, stock markets all over Asia, I think people understand. They may not understand the full implications of tariffs, but they know we are a trading country, and if the United States puts up tariffs and there is a problem between US and China, it's not good for us. The good thing about the population in Singapore, and in many ways we are unique, is that our population has an understanding of the situation, but they also have a trust in the government and confidence, and they believe that the government, will do its best to find a way. And there is a large degree of unity within Singapore. If the government stands up and says, look, we need to go down this route, these are the things we need to do, I think you will get a large measure of support because of the government's past track record. So what you are actually describing is not them being blasé, but them saying, okay, I know there is a problem.
Right.
The government will come up with various solutions and they will tell us, and we have trust and faith in that.
Right.
That doesn't mean government can come up with whatever prescriptions it likes.
Yeah.
People will analyze,
Right.
and the prescriptions and the suggestions and the way forward has got to make sense.
Right.
There are lots of people in Singapore who understand these things, and they will question if you don't get the situation right.
Singapore is a high trust society, especially for the government. But from my outside perspective, outside of politics, it seems like over the last 10 years, right, there has been more debate in Parliament, right? And other people have said that discussions can become more populist. I've always wondered and wanted to ask, like when the cabinet is making decisions, how do they balance this issue of, look, we understand what the issues are, we need to plan for the long term, versus the fact that actually people can have short-term aspirations. It's a very complex thing to navigate. What are the fundamental factors that you're thinking about?
If you in cabinet think in terms of, is this going to make me popular, then many things cannot be done.
Yeah.
And in the longer term, that is bad for Singapore. It will be bad for the government because government will be voted out like in many other countries.
Yeah.
Because Singapore won't succeed and the government will rightly be held responsible.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, it will also be very serious for Singapore. And unlike many other countries, we don't have the luxury of making too many mistakes.
Yeah.
Other countries can make mistake after mistake after mistake, and the inherent resources of the country and the size will see them through. For us, we can't afford it. So the government has got to comprise ministers, and thankfully, our approach has always been, what is the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Okay, right thing to do is this. Would it create, controversy? Would people be unhappy? Some of the things would make people unhappy in the short term, but then you have to explain to them why you need it and what you can do about it, and what you can do, what the government can do about it, and why in the longer term this is in the country's best interest. So many of the things that we've done in the past, there were controversies, there was unhappiness, short term, medium, but after a while people look at it, they realize, they understand, and Singapore is successful. So you need that ability to say we have to do this and we have to explain it to the people. And by and large, while there have been some populist elements in the debate, true, but Singaporeans as a whole, as I said earlier, have high trust in the government. When the government seeks to explain, even if they don't like it, they sort of see the rationale, or at least they suspend judgment and then we take, for example, the 2% GST, 1% first and then 1%. It's okay. It's far easier to say we won't do it. Leave the problem for someone else. But you have an aging population. By 2030, 1 in 4 will be over 65. Healthcare costs are shooting up. By 2030, healthcare expenditure will overtake defense. It will be more than 1/5 of our budget. There are many other expenditures that are going up. So if you are a responsible government, you will say it up front. You will say, no, I got to put in these measures. And at 9%, my GST is much lower than many advanced countries. And my tax, 1 in 2 Singaporeans don't pay income tax. And look, I will explain to you, I will also say for a majority of Singaporeans, we're talking more than 50% of Singaporeans, for 5 years, they will not feel the impact of this 2% increase because of the offsets the government gives. So when you talk about, oh, this is temporary, you're saying, look, for the next foreseeable future, 5 years, we are going to put in place measures where more than 50% of Singaporeans will not feel the impact. Most of the GST is paid by the top 20%. In fact, we are in the lowest 20% of the economic, socio-economic sector, as in your income levels. You get $4 for every dollar of tax you pay. You get $4 back. You're in the middle, you get $2 back. So you need to explain this to people, and this canard that the GST is turbocharging inflation. that is untrue, and the people who know economics know that it is untrue.
Yeah.
But it's populist, and you have to deal with these things.
For the record, I agree with that approach. I think that's why I joined the PAP, right? Because I think
Politics had
no, that's why, obviously, right? Like if you've been around the world, we've been around the world, seen lots of countries that are underdeveloped or developed, and they always kind of miss that point where you need to think 20, 30 years.
I wanted to just get your opinion as well on governance, rule of law, and trust. All of these intersect in different ways. If you speak to non-Singaporeans who come to Singapore, they'll always say, I come to Singapore because it works, things works. But they will also say, oh, it's very strict, everything is very controlled. But we have a high trust society. How do you see these complexities playing out? Do you think it's overrated, underrated, what we are to the outside world?
If you ask most people in Singapore, Singaporeans, and foreigners living in Singapore, they may initially say it's very strict, but after a while they realize most things they want to do, they can go ahead and do. If they want to have cannabis or drugs, they can't, which they can in many other places in the West, where they come from, perhaps. But other than that, in terms of personal freedoms, in terms of what you want to say, what you want to do, you want to, fulfill your aspirations, try and achieve the best you can. People find that actually in Singapore, because of the strong framework of law, the most important human rights are protected. What do I mean? You, or any male or female, particularly women, you can walk around Singapore at any time of the day or night without fear.
Yeah.
It's a very essential, basic freedom in most cities, advanced or not advanced. And second, your child goes to school, you know that he or she is not going to get drugs pushed to the child, and you know that the child can take public transport and will return home alive.
Yeah.
There is that confidence,
basic,
right? Such basic. The parks are parks, you don't have syringes, you don't have drugs, you don't have needles.
Yeah.
People, can run around, children can run around. It's, you breathe the fresh air. It's one of the 6 blue zones in the world.
Yeah.
It's amazing that an urban city like Singapore can be one of the blue zones in the world, where quality of life and health index is very high. Healthcare accessibility, it's number 1 in the world, according to Legatum index. If you look at all the indicators, our life expectancy has gone up.
Yeah.
If you look at education, it is easily accessible, and world-class education at at literally no cost.
Yeah.
Except when you go to university, you need to pay 25% of the fees. And that's because when you come out, you're going to make some money, and the principle is that taxpayers shouldn't fully fund your education. If you can't, there are many avenues available for help, including bursaries and scholarships.
Yeah.
So I would say that the framework is something that when you sit down and think about it, quite a lot of things work well. It's not perfect. It's always a work in progress because there will always be something else to do. So that is the approach that we take, and I think people, once they understand it, then they appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really good to talk to you about the wider macro perspective of Singapore. Let's cut to a quick break, and maybe when we come back, we'll delve deeper in some of the more micro issues in Singapore.
Okay.
And talk politics.
Yeah, talk politics.
Thank you.
Welcome back from the break.
Welcome back. Thanks again, Min, for doing this.
Thank you.
I'm sure you're eager to move on with your day, but we just wanted to quickly talk about what's happening right now,
Yes.
right, in Singapore, which is that the writ of election has been called, and
Yes.
the GE is coming up.
Yes.
Both you and I will be involved. And this is your 9th contest. But I wanted to go back to your first contest, actually, and,
Right.
and ask, you are very different to different people, right? Sometimes you're seen as very conservative, sometimes you're seen as progressive. You have done a lot of work to make policies more compassionate, but also some very hardline policies as well. When you entered politics, you weren't even 30. Did you ever expect that you'd have to wear so many hats?
When I entered Parliament, I had no idea that I'll be a minister. It was always talked about as a possibility right from the beginning. But it's not something that I sort of worked for or thought a lot about. You know, obviously I didn't think in terms of I will be doing all of these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's, a public view of you. Like, personally, do you think, I wish people realize everything I do comes from this place?
I would say the public view is depends on which public you're talking about.
Yeah.
The majority of the public, if you asked, will probably say, and I base this on good data, that this is a man who keeps our framework of laws to keep us safe, and he does what is right. And some of them require him to be tough, but we are glad because we are safe and our children are safe, and Singapore is very different from most other places.
Yeah.
And in other areas, he pushes the boundaries to try and make sure that there is change. I'm not sure people have a detailed understanding of what we do, but I think by and large they understand the government, and it's not an individual minister, it's a cabinet as a whole that works on these policies. But there will be a 20%, 15 to 20% who would be unhappy with our current style of governance. And they would like to see a very different type of government and a very different style of governance.
Yeah.
So yes, if you ask those 20%, I think many people in government, including I, would not be their cup of tea. But I think if you ask the majority of Singaporeans, they would say, yes, we support this. And so, it's a question of how you look at it. But even more important is, you must get majority support for what you do.
Yeah.
But it's important that first you work out what is right. What's the right thing to do for the country? Then you go out and persuade. For example, say the death penalty. We believed that it's right to have it for trafficking in drugs above a certain quantity. And we went out and explained, and as I said elsewhere, I noticed a discernible shift in that nearly between 7 to 8 out of 10 persons support. So, if you say, okay, it's a tough policy, this is the minister in charge of, having the policy in our books. So he is tough. If you ask the 20% who oppose it, a part of the 20%, not the entire 20%, would be extremely unhappy. And they are quite vocal.
Yeah.
The 75 to 80% who are supportive are not going to go out there and engage in protest. They're just glad that they live in Singapore.
Yeah.
And my question is, can I live in peace with myself and sleep with a clear conscience if I do something that actually results in more people dying, which I'm sure will happen if we loosened up some of these laws. But on the other hand, we loosen up the laws that we need to. We try and move our population, get the buy-in from the population for making the changes we think ought to be made. Rather than having labels progressive or tough or conservative, I would say really judge the government, judge me, judge other ministers by, is it working for Singapore and Singaporeans, the policies?
But, especially a lot of Singaporeans who are voting in this election, getting a lot of their, political ideology from the West, that's always been framed on this paradigm between conservatives and liberals. 10 years ago, whether it's in the US or Europe, people who were younger were much more progressive. And then you see when Trump came and how things have changed in Europe, there is a shift to conservatism. These are things that maybe young people don't quite get, the fact that we're a bit more progressive than they think.
It's actually useful to take reference from what you talked about, the West. 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, what you would call the left was appealing to the young people. And now many in these societies are moving towards hard right, perhaps what you might call populist even. There is a lesson here for us, and that is that many of these societies, and some in Singapore too, put ideology ahead of what works. So if you subscribe to an ideology and then try and push through policies based on that ideology, regardless of whether it works for the society, then there will be a reaction from the middle ground. And what you're seeing in the West today is a reaction from the middle ground. If you get into these sorts of issues, the culture wars, then the middle grounds, they are live and let live. They are prepared to be accepting, they are prepared to be accommodating. But if you push extreme ideology to them, that becomes a problem. And what you're seeing is a reaction to that. For example, the baker who refused to bake a cake for the same-sex couple. A lot of Americans may be prepared to accept, I think are prepared to accept same-sex couples and same-sex marriages, but they don't see why someone who is religiously objecting to that should be forced to bake a cake. And it goes to the courts, and the courts say, no, he has to bake. I think middle ground Americans say that is wrong. It offends common sense. You have same-sex marriage, fine. You want a cake, fine, but find somebody who will bake it. And there will be enough people who will bake it. Why do you make it a principle to go to somebody who is religiously objecting to it and force him to do it? And you know, this whole thing about defund the police, because the police are the source of problems. People in the middle ground get upset when you have these sorts of slogans and these sorts of policies. So most people recognize the police are part of the solution. Maybe there are elements there which need to be better dealt with, but to treat criminals as all byproducts of social injustice and the police as part of the problem doesn't sit well with the middle ground. Now in Singapore, we don't look at it as left, right, progressive, whatever. We look at where the middle ground is. We look at what people want. They want a safe society. In order to have a safe society, we need these things. We explain to them. They accept, we put it in. At the same time, we know that people want to move, you know, with the times. They want more freedoms in specific areas. I'm talking about social mores and social conventions. And the law and the policies need to keep pace with those changes and not always behind, but not too far ahead as well. And you've got to go at the pace that people are comfortable with. And so you look at you know, some of the things I do, they look progressive. You look at some of the things that I do, it looks you know, sort of conservative. But the reality is we are very practical people. We have a vision of where society needs to go, or where we would like the fundamentals of how society ought to be. But that vision comes from the current structure of society and what people want.
And it's unique to our own nuance.
Every country is in some ways unique. We are unique in our own ones, and the question is understanding it and making sure people are comfortable with it. And where the change is not going to be completely comfortable, explaining it to them.
People say that elections are a report card to how the government has maybe performed in the last 5 years. Do you see it in that way? And if you do, how well do you think this government has performed?
Singapore is unique because people expect the government to do well. That's given. And some often elections turn or elections in specific constituencies turn on other factors. People want, generally in the past anyway, people in the main have wanted a PAP government, but you know, when they have voted for the opposition, that's for very specific reasons. But I would say if you look at the last 5 years, if you look at the economic factors, it's actually been quite good. If you look at GDP nominally, was 2019, the year before the 2020 elections, was about $380 billion. Now it's gone up by more than 30%. As of 2023 actually, it's over 500 billion. We don't have the figures for 2024. So that's a significant growth. If you look at GDP per capita, it was $66,000 US in 2019.
Right.
Now it is US $85,000 as of 2023, and it's likely to have gone up. That's a 30% increase. If you look at foreign direct investment, it was just under 2 trillion in 2019. In 2023, it's nearly 3 trillion, $2.8 trillion. Now, people are voting with their money. Why are they putting so much money in Singapore?
Right.
Confidence in Singapore. And it makes money for us too. And if you look at household income, let's take the median, not the top, not the bottom, it's not an average, median in the middle. It was at about $9,500 in 2019. It's gone up to about $11,300 in 2024.
Right.
That's an increase of 20%. And the inequality index, the Gini coefficient, it's not the most perfect index, but it's an index that people use. Once you take into account government transfers and taxes, the inequality index has actually gone down. So I can tell you many other things like healthcare, the planning, the infrastructure, the transport, the planning for the southern waterfront. It's 30 kilometers of beachfront. Once we bring in additional sort of waterfront, it can go up to 120 kilometers. 6,000 HDB flats have been announced in that area. More will be. 100,000 flats have been built, and we were held back by COVID. That's been accelerated, so people's waiting times have come down.
Yeah.
So whether you look at housing, you look at healthcare, you look at the economy, you look at jobs. If you look at 2024, 87% of graduates of local universities found jobs within 6 months. You don't get that in most countries, right? Youth unemployment is a significant factor. Overall unemployment has come down from about 3-4% to 2%. So jobs, job creation, investment flows, FDI flows, household income, everything has gone up. But meanwhile, due to external factors, the two wars in Middle East and Ukraine, food prices have gone up. And because of oil and the freight costs, both the first shock was COVID, but then the second shock were these wars. There has been a significant spike, and so people feel it. So you can't say everything is hunky-dory, because people feel the impact of increased inflation. In fact, every government that has gone for elections in the last 18 months or so has mostly lost.
That's right.
And one or two which did remain in power did significantly poorly. People vote with their pocketbook, and the pocketbooks have been hurt. And people in Singapore also, cost of living is a significant issue. So you cannot underplay it. It's a significant issue. It's an issue they are concerned about when they go to the market, when they go to the shops. Many people understand these are due to factors beyond our control, but that doesn't mean that they can be happy about it. Government over every budget, including this year, last year, have given significant vouchers and cash and so on to help, particularly targeted at those with lower incomes.
Minister, some people have said that there is a likelihood of an opposition wipeout. What are your views on that?
The opposition knows, we know, and I think most people know, there is not going to be an opposition wipeout. If you look at their statements, you see them talking about safe seats. They know that they have very safe seats from their perspective.
I know we've taken up a lot of your time. I have one last question. It's a really quick one. As a Singaporean Indian, I know you are a prominent member of the Singapore Indian community. And I think a lot of people might be saying out there, is it very difficult to find a good Indian candidate? Has there been a shortage of good Indian candidates? Is it a poison chalice? Should more Singapore Indians be more active in politics? What are your thoughts on that?
I think in general, given today's economic environment, prior to the latest issues relating to tariffs, whether you're Indian, Malay, or Chinese, the private sector offers you very good opportunities. And if you're doing well, it's not easy to persuade people to come into politics. That's a given. In the rest of the world, you can see a collapse in the quality of people in parliament, in the front benches. Singapore, thankfully, we haven't had that situation, but it's certainly getting increasingly difficult.
Yeah.
Specific to Indian candidates, I think the number of Indian MPs in parliament, including those in front bench, is I think nearer 11%. It's above the national percentage of Indians.
Right.
So I'm not sure why there is this perception. If you look at the office holders, it's also well beyond the Indian percentage. If you look at number of cabinet ministers, number of junior ministers, quite a lot of office holders. And in the latest rounds, I mean, not all the candidates have been announced, but you would have seen from the reports a number of Indian potential candidates have been spotted.
Yeah.
Dr. Hamid Razak has been spotted, Dinesh has been spotted. The facts are otherwise.
Yes.
Let me
Yes.
put it that way.
Yeah.
So, Min, thanks for joining. I'm really sorry I have to cut you off because I have to go for a house visit, and I think you have your own things to do.
I have MPS.
You have MPS. Okay. Anyway, so thanks everyone. Thanks, Min, for joining. We are the Local Politics, and now I can put back my campaign hat on.
No agendas, just answers.
Oh, that
Thank you,
too.
Min.
Thank you.